We'll begin the talk. It's 1 minute past 5 and more people can join us as we go along. So you're very welcome to today's talk. It's in collaboration with Design and Crafts Council of Ireland, and my name is Aisling and I work in the Education Department of the National Museum of Ireland Decorative Arts and History based in Collins Barracks. And we are here today to host a live talk in aid of Culture Night actually tonight. So for Culture Night, we're hosting this event for the exhibition InForm, which, as I said, is a collaboration between the National Museum of Ireland and the Design and Crafts Council of Ireland as well. And we're joined today by the curator of the exhibition, Dr. Edith Andrees. And Edith is actually joined then by two of the graduates from the exhibition. We have Lexi McLeod, who is a ceramicist, and we have Anne-Marie Reinhold, who is a jewellery designer as well. We're also joined by two of the tutors from the Jewellery and Design course and from the Ceramics course, which is based in Thomastown. So we're joined by Emer Conyard, who is the tutor for the Jewellery and Goldsmithing course, and then we're joined by Gus Mabelson, who was a ceramics tutor in Thomastown, was heavily involved in the project as well. And today we're going to talk about the importance of the 2-year collaborative project, which resulted in the very, very beautiful and successful exhibition InForm. And first off, what we're going to do is start off with Edith Andrees, the curator, who's going to introduce the exhibition and give you a bit of a background as to where the project came from and the collaboration with the museum and the Crafts Council as well, and the resulting exhibition that we would have had with the project itself as well. Just before I pass you on to Edith, I just want to say there will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation session of this talk. If you would like to ask any questions, just pop the questions in the chat box on Zoom. You'll see it at the very, very bottom of the screen. Or if you would like to join in on audio or video, you're more than welcome to do that at the end as well if you want to ask your question that way as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Edith, who is going to give you a brief presentation on the exhibition, and then we'll move on to Anne-Marie and Lexi, who are going to talk about their practice as well. Okay, so I'll hand it over to you, Edith, and I'll share my screen for your presentation as well.
Thank you, Aisling, and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining to this Culture Night event. So as Aisling said, I'm going to just give a brief overview of the exhibition and how we got to this point, I suppose, about the InForm project, just a little short introduction, and then I hand over to the makers, some of the makers that were involved in the InForm project. So for those of you who haven't seen the exhibition in Collins Barracks yet, it consists of 90 new ceramic and jewellery pieces and 23 historic museum objects that inspired the contemporary pieces. And they're displayed alongside each other. So you can see in the image on the screen a wine bottle, a porcelain wine bottle made by Iona Crawford Top. And that was inspired, for example, by this 18th century glass bottle, onion-shaped glass bottle from Dublin. So just one example of the old and new next to each other. And on the next slide, you can see a pocket globe there in the exhibition space and surrounded by the celestial sphere by Laura Matikaite, who sort of nested 5 vessels into each other. And that was the inspiration, the small pocket globe from the 19th century. So really, in total, we worked with around 22 makers from the ceramic and jewellery and goldsmithing courses run by the Design and Crafts Council of Ireland in County Kilkenny. And on the next slide, you will see the workshops. On the left-hand side, this is a lovely former mill building in Thomastown, where the ceramic students worked. And on the right-hand side, that's the goldsmithing and the jewellery and goldsmithing course, where the jewellery students worked during the project. And we were lucky as museum staff to go down and get actually some hands-on experience as well, making some jewellery or trying to anyway, and ceramics. So that was a great experience. And then students came up to the museum we had tours in Collins Sparks. We had also workshops where each student chose 2 objects, which we took out from the reserve collection mostly, but it was really from across collections from across the National Museum of Ireland. And we had a really close look at them, handled them where possible as well. So that was a key part of the project in the museum, on the museum side. And really, I think it's fair to say that we all learned quite a lot from each other during the project. So from the museum's point of view, we really got a chance to look at the reserve collections in particular, and a lot of Asian art objects more closely, and also find objects that were in need of repair as well. So if you go on to the next slide, Eshin, this is the overall look of the exhibition as you find it in Collins Barracks, the InForm exhibition where the ceramics and the jewellery are displayed together in this gallery. And on the next slide, you see an example of a museum object on the left-hand side that had been restored by the Applied Arts conservator Hannah Power from the museum, who really trained herself in straw marquetry and replaced some of the front of the box, the straw marquetry on the front of the box, with new straw marquetry, straw work. So she dyed the straw and repaired it. So this would probably not have happened at that point in time if it hadn't been for the project. So a lot of objects got a bit of a repair done, or in this case, quite a substantial repair, and we were able to research around some of the objects as well. And here you see on the right-hand side as well, Sarah Power's brooches that were inspired by this box, or rather the pattern on the box. And you see how she developed a weaving technique and incorporated it into her brooches. So really a lot of new learning and techniques examined in the process for all sides involved. And then you also see on the next slide a glass vessel on the left-hand side, which really illustrates quite nicely how this project linked us to past generations of makers and collectors as well. So really to cultural traditions around the globe. In this case, the bottle had been excavated in the 19th century in Sidon in modern-day Lebanon. And it's nearly 2,000 years old. And you can see a little label on the front there, and which had been put on in the 19th century, most likely. It's not a practice we would follow today in museums, but it just tells us about the way of record keeping and information keeping as well throughout the ages, really. And Lexi McLeod, who is here with us today, will talk to you more about her inspiration from this bottle. And you see her wonderful, exquisite pieces there on the right-hand side in the photograph, 9 minute porcelain vessels, and you'll hear more in a moment about those. So really contemporary collecting and including some of the work that came out of the InForm project was really important to us. I mean, this is a core role of the National Museum to collect contemporary crafts and objects and keep them as a record for future generations. So on the next slide, you can see some of the acquisitions. We were purchasing one of Anne-Marie's brooches, which you see on the left-hand side. And again, you'll hear more from her directly today about her process of creating this and actually 6 other brooches as well as part of the InForm project. And we also acquired Shivano Sullivan's necklace, which you see on the right-hand side. And this was based on a Japanese vase, and in particular the dragon on the vase, which you see in the corner there, and the movement of the dragon, which is echoed in the different parts of the chain, different segments of the chain. And then from the ceramics, ceramic students, on the next slide, you see Antonio Lopez pinhole camera, which was based on a wooden box camera, and discs as well. So he actually made the ceramic vessel, the ceramic body you see on the image, inserting a glass disc, so you can look through it and take images. He did it on his mobile phone of whatever is on the other side. And in this case, it's the ceramic school in Thomastown, which she photographed and printed onto the disc. So we have a record of the place where the training took place, but also a nice echo of the museum object, which she was inspired by. And Jennifer Alford, some of you might have heard her in our talk in August. She used a rushlight holder, very humble object, very everyday, if you like, used in Ireland in cottages or small houses, dwellings in the early 20th century in this case. And it was collected in County Kerry. And she took it to a completely different level in her porcelain form and printed the character-like figures onto the form. So a lot of dynamics in it. So these objects you will see after the InForm exhibition comes down in the permanent collections in the National Museum. And you can see all the stories of the makers online if you haven't seen them already, and also in the catalogue, which you see an image of here. It's for sale online and also in the museum shop, and you can read and browse and see all the images of the objects, museum objects and contemporary objects in the catalogue. And so lastly, on the last slide, I just have another shot of the exhibition as you find it in Collins Barracks until next Sunday. So we're coming to the last week of it. Unfortunately, it couldn't be on quite as long as we'd hoped due to the pandemic, but at least we got a good summer on. And if you're around before next Sunday, do come and see it. And we have a few videos after the closing time still online, so you can always check those out later. But I do hand over now to Anne-Marie Reinhold, who is the jeweler, one of the jewelers who was involved in the project. And Eshin, if you'd like to move on to the next slide, and Anne-Marie, I hand over now. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Edith. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk you a little bit through my process of creating my brooches. So they were inspired by the Japanese lacquer fish you see in the image here. And so we had a few visits to the museum, and I think I saw the fish in my very first visit, and it kind of stuck with me since then. And I really remembered the golden shine, and he was like a little character to me. So I kind of, I really liked the fish. So, and I was always so curious what material he was made from, and because he seemed like it was metal, but I wasn't quite sure. And we only found out later when we got to pick objects and got to handle them. And it was actually not metal, it was made from wood. So it was really light. And so I was very surprised finding that out as well. And also the size was quite nice. I liked that it wasn't too big. And but even though it was like good to handle in your hands, but it had a lot of detail as well. And also when you turned it over, you could see some the other side of the fin. So I took some, next slide, please. Sorry. I took some photos then of the different fins, and those lines, the very fine details, it's very difficult to see here in the photos, but I really liked the kind of fluidity and the delicate lines. And I created some drawings then to kind of replicate the detail. So in the next slide, you can see I then moved on and had a look as well on different shapes to see how I could maybe kind of bring the form of the fish into it as well, and combine them with the like flowing forms of the fin. And so I did a lot of drawings to kind of figure things out. And in the next slide, then you can see that I also looked at the fish all over had like different kind of carved in, I would say, scales. And I really liked that pattern also. So in the beginning, I wasn't quite sure if I should just focus on the scales or the fin, because there was like a lot of information in the fish. So I also did some paper maquettes then looking at the scales, but I decided to mainly focus on the fin of the fish. And in the next slide, you can see I moved on to paper maquettes, and I thought the details, the fine lines, really kind of came across well when I used the paper, because it was very light and delicate, and then I used a scalpel to kind of create paper cuts in the paper, and so I thought that worked best. And so I kind of folded the paper then and tried to create more three-dimensional forms. The next slide, please. Yeah, and so I did like some more complicated ones where I had loads of lines, and then a few more simple ones where I just had one cut, just to see what would be the different qualities of a piece. And in the next slide, I moved on to metal then, just because it does react quite different to paper. And I used copper in the beginning as to see, if it would work the same as on paper, but it didn't, because it was a lot thicker. And so when I created those lines I did in paper, it didn't really flow as well, and it looked a bit harder. So what I decided then, I thought I might just leave the lines as they are and use my paper cuts to kind of emboss them onto the surface of the metal. So in the next slide, you can see, so I created in the end 7 brooches in total, and it was kind of a progression. So I started with a very simple brooch, and then I tried to include more and more of the explorations maybe. So, and in the one here down on the left, the silver one, you can see I used the paper cuts, so there's the different scales as well. You can see very subtle. So I cut the scales onto the paper, and then I put it onto the metal sheet, and you run it through a rolling mill, which means that the paper and the metal is under a lot of pressure, and you are left then with like an impression of the paper onto the metal. And I use that for the fin here as well, on that brooch on the left. And so that worked very well for me. And in some other brooches, I used also some wire to recreate those lines. And some of them, 2 of them have also kambu, which is like a very fine sheet of gold fused onto the silver surface. And I think that's a very nice contrast as well, and a nice memory as well of the golden fish, I think. Yeah, so thank you very much for your time. And I'm introducing Lexi, so the ceramics student, or the ceramics graduate. Sorry, Lexi.
No worries. Okay, thank you very much, and that was a fantastic talk. So yes, hello, I'm Lexi McLeod, and I am one of the potters from Thomastown who was very lucky to be involved with this collaboration with Collins Barracks for the InForm exhibition. Can I have my first slide, please? So this collaboration, it allowed us to delve into the archives of Collins Barracks, and that was kind of a bit of a dream come true. We were able to spend hours roaming through the halls and staring into these vast glass cabinets full of wonders. But for me, I just kept returning to these glass bottles, these unguentarium. I really just fell in love with their irregular forms, their clouded iridescence, and their jumbled together composition. It drew me back time and time again. And when I found out that they were some of the earliest forms of blown glass, and that they were nearly 2,000 years old, I was a little blown away by the delicate craftsmanship that's lasted millennia, and with barely a chip or crack. It was quite overwhelming in a wonderful way. And I was also very taken, as Edith had said before, with the little labels that were on only some of the bottles for when they'd been introduced to different museums, and how slightly informal these labels were. So as you can see here, they comment that elegant shape and very desirable little specimen and quite perfect. And these led me to think about these bottles in a narrative way, in the lives that they'd lived through, and the people who'd known them, and the narratives that were involved, from maker to customer to lost in time to found by archaeologists and then into the museum, and now they're in a public place where people can gaze at them in awe and in their beauty and their history. And I guess now to me. Can I have my next slide, please? So for me, one of the most amazing parts of this collaboration was the handling session. This artist museum collaboration allowed us to go into the museum and for them to choose artifacts for us to hold. Although my collection's actually inspired by the entire cabinet of Ungotarium, I was allowed to come in and see this one bottle here, and I got to hold this 2,000-year-old bottle in all its tiny glory and watch as its iridescence changed in the light as we carefully turned it from side to side. And I feel very privileged to have had this opportunity, and it was truly wonderful. Oh, next slide, please. This museum visit, and inspired by this museum visit and this handling session, I immediately started sketching ideas and developing possibilities of form and for the upcoming project. I was truly taken by the irregular nature of the Ungotarium, and I really wanted to capture it in my sketches. Next slide. So these are more of those sketches. And the next slide again, please. So quickly, as you can see, I very quickly filled up lots of wee sketchbooks with very excited, very quick sketches, and I was very excited and bursting with energy to get onto the wheel and to play with these in a 3D form. For this project, I decided to use porcelain. I wanted to echo the Ungotarium's original material, and porcelain is practically a glass itself. So I chose that for that reason, but also for its possibilities of translucency and for its color response with my glazes. However, tiny hitch, not long after this project began, COVID hit, and as it hit the whole world, it was quite traumatic. And so during this time, I had to relocate to my Scottish home in the Highlands. But I was very lucky, and I was able to set up this small studio in our back garage. And with the kindness of a local potter, I was able to continue developing these ideas and working on this project. Next slide, please. So once I'd returned to Thomastown, I was able to focus on the glaze element of this project. I'd been playing with the idea of message in a bottle, and I was fascinated with the Ungotarium's narrative possibilities. And I wanted each piece that I made to have its own narrative and its own unique memory. So partly the way I wanted to convey this was I wanted each piece to have its own unique glaze. Now this took weeks of development and glaze mixing and testing and firing, and I think in the end I actually ended up with over 300 test tiles fired in 6 different kiln atmospheres. So it was a lot of work, but it was really, really worth it, and I really enjoyed it. Next slide, please. So once the glaze development had been completed and I chose my final bottles and chose the entire selection to match each narrative, because I wanted them to work as a whole, not to be individual. I also chose to use some ceramic lusters on my pieces as a nod to the iridescence of the original Ungotarium. And then I just started to play. I made small plinths and just began to play with their composition with the different bottles, and just to see what worked as a collection. Next slide, please. And so to the final piece. Each bottle here on display has its own unique glaze, but it also has a memory kept within it. And I mean that literally. There is a tiny message written and carefully placed within each bottle. Now, some of these narratives are given in the labeling in the museum, but some I've kept secret, unlabeled. Like the original Ungotarium, their narratives they're kept close, known only to their maker and to themselves, for not all stories are recorded or shared. Doesn't mean they didn't happen. So that is my piece and my talk, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Lexi and Marie and Edith, for your excellent presentation. It's so good to get each individual kind of perspective of the entire 2-year project and subsequent exhibition with that as well. And what I want to do is hand it over actually to Emer and Gus as well, just in terms of, as your position, I suppose, as a tutor and an educator, why do you think this collaboration with the museum is so important for the students and the graduates themselves?
Do you want to take that, Emer, or do you want to? I think Emer's on mute. If anybody, Emer can.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me, Emer? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I mean, the project has been amazing. I mean, and I think that you know, one of the biggest things that happened, and I think the biggest impact on the students, is that it sent them in directions from a technical and design point of view that they never ever would have gone. You know, and I think sometimes with, you know, projects, you know, we've a lot of projects covered throughout the 2-year course, and I think, you know, sometimes students can kind of end up, they've got a, you know, there's a style there, there's a design kind of, whether it's a motif or an aesthetic or whatever. And I think this project, where they're having to take pieces from the museum's collection, has just blown it wide open, because it sent them off in directions where they never ever would have gone. And it's made them as well research, in some cases, techniques that aren't necessarily been used anymore. And it's really made them dissect and look into the museum's collection in much more detail than they would normally do. Like the handling sessions, I think, were incredible. And you know, as Anna Marie said, her piece, when you picked it up, it was as light as a feather. We thought it was made from metal, but it wasn't, it was lacquer. So that definitely, even just them being able to pick up the piece and hold that lacquer box in her hands, has absolutely influenced, you know, the design and the aesthetic of her brooches, because her brooches are very, even though they're metal, one of those brooches is probably heavier than that box, which, you know, is mind-blowing, because the fish is probably 6 or 7 or 8 times bigger, but it's because she was able to actually physically hold that lacquer piece in her hand. There's a lightness to her pieces, and they're very lively, and there's a refinement there. So that handling session, I think, you know, it's you don't get that privilege normally. Everything's behind glass cases, and so yeah, it's been an incredible project.
I think, if I can just come in now, I think in a broader context, it is so important that makers of contemporary objects have links with collections, and from my point of view, it was building a bridge between makers and the museum, and bringing people together. I mean, I think Emer would echo this, just from a personal point of view, meeting the staff and the team at the National Museum. That's built a bond and a bridge, you know, that can be built on, you know, and not just, I think the students were very lucky to be taken into this exhibition, but I think in the future there's great potential for makers of contemporary work to build those links, and to see the curators and collectors and the people who have the knowledge and experience of the objects that are in these museums available to them. Because like Emer said, when you start seeing the stories behind the objects and the reasons why they were made, who they were made for, and when they were made, not just how they were made, it gives you a complete insight to the objects. And there is a direct link. If you're making something now, you can't help but be linked to the people who've done whatever craft you're choosing in the past. And I think the museums offer a gateway into and access to those objects. So I think that was hugely important. The whole project, I think, is a landmark project, not just because it was the students and courses, but in a broader context. You know, I think it was one of the best things that we've been involved in jointly as the courses. You know, both courses were involved in it in all the time that I've been running the program in ceramics. Yeah.
And Gus and Emer, in terms of the collaboration yourselves, obviously the students have learned so much in terms of techniques and discovering different kind of narratives and things like that. But from your perspective as educators, has your time with the project over the last 2 years influenced your own practice? From Emer and Gus, your perspective.
I mean, I feel very fortunate to be working in full-time education from my own, definitely my technical ability in jewellery and silversmithing is much, much broader as a result of my time in education. And I think definitely for me, my own practice has a very close relationship with my teaching practice and vice versa. They're hand in hand. I think, you know, my own practice, I suppose, keeps me energized about what I do as a maker, and that's an incredibly important part of who I am. But yeah, I definitely, you know, students come up with weird and wonderful ideas, you know, for every project, and a lot of times it's like we're never going to, you know, myself and Gus are, you know, in a lot of cases maybe haven't made anything that is like that, and I know that's definitely the case for me in metal. And we just have to sit down and put our heads together and we go, all right, we need to work this out and problem solve and build and experiment, and so yeah, as a result of that, my teaching has definitely had a huge influence on my practice, for sure.
Yeah, I would echo that with what Emer said. I think if you are teaching, you're always learning as well. It's not just a one-way process. If you're running courses and you're imparting skills and knowledge and competencies, you're always learning yourself as well. And with regards museums, I think I would have always seen them as a go-to place to look at what had been done before, whether it's a museum in any country I ever visit. I always go to the museums to see what's going on, and I think it's important that link is passed on to students as well. I mean, through study trips. But in terms of personal practice, I think, yeah, if you're involved in teaching, it's bound to you know, influence you. I mean, you give, but also it's a two-way process. You can send, you know, a student down a line of inquiry, which you don't know what the results are going to be. You know, the what if question is always predominant in any workshop that I've been involved in. What if you did this? And there is no answer. So you go finding, you go looking. And so that's to create students that are automatically curious about what's going on and asking questions. Curiosity is curiosity and observation are the two most powerful things you can give students. And once you give them that, they're doing the same as you. They're asking questions all the time, and you actually see those questions being answered by the work that the students are doing and your own practice as well. Yeah.
Excellent. And just to, if any of our participants would like to ask questions, as I said, you can pop them into the chat below. Feel free to ask and go ahead. Actually, we think we have a question that just came in here now at the moment. So is it possible that future collaborations will happen between NMI and DCCI courses? Could InForm be an ongoing biannual event? So I'll probably hand that over to Edith, that question.
Yes, we had conversations already with the Design Crafts Council to see how we can continue it, because it's always nice to have a project, but to make it more sustainable, obviously, is the key thing. At the moment with the exhibition program and plan, I don't think it can be a biannual show of this scale, but I definitely think we can continue the on-site workshops and a smaller selection of makers' pieces together with the museum objects or whatever way we work it on display as well, more regularly, so that it's not just contemporary crafts and applied arts that has been acquired for the main collections, but that are part of ongoing training and exploration. So definitely the workshops and having that exchange on site and using the collections more regularly is definitely on the cards. And I'm sure you will see more in the coming years from the next courses. I think in 22, Emma and Gus, the next courses start. So the next students are being taken in. So once they progress, we will see more, I'm sure.
And just to echo what you're saying, Edith, in terms of the workshops, and Lexi, you would have mentioned it too in terms of the handling session. So I'll put it to both Lexi and Anna-Marie as well. Why do you think the handling session was so important? Do you think your resulting object would have been very different if you didn't have the opportunity to actually handle and have a deep kind of look, and I suppose your sketches and things with the actual physical object, or would have been different if you just seen it kind of typical behind glass in a museum?
Do you want to go first, or shall I?
You go first.
For me, the handling sessions, first of all, I was just, as I said, overwhelmed by the privilege of being able to handle such objects. But they definitely did inform the making, partly because, especially with glass, it changes in the light, and when it's in a cabinet in I'm not even sure if there's windows there in the place it was. There might be small windows, but it's more artificially light. To be able to hold that up to natural light and see how the iridescence for my particular piece had changed in the light and in handling it brought it to life, and for me really brought home the craftsmanship and the narratives that I was beginning to already get excited about, and rather than it just being a piece sitting on a shelf.
Anna-Marie, what's your kind of take then, I suppose, on the handling sessions? How has that influenced your overall work?
Yeah, I think for me it really made a difference as well, because I wasn't sure before, as Emma said, what material it actually was made from, and yeah, just to being able to pick it up, see it from the other side, and having a really close look. And I think it was originally, you were able to open it. I think it was hollow inside as well, but we weren't able to open it in the end. But yeah, to kind of find out like those little things that, yeah, you wouldn't just, you know, being able to see like through the glass. And yeah, it just was, yeah, you felt a little bit closer to the object as well, I think. So that definitely made a difference. And yeah, I think also, yeah, the aspect of lightness, and yeah, to bring that back into the brooches and maybe consider that as well as an element of going forward with designing. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, from all of the students really that were involved in the project, that it connects you more to the actual object itself when you kind of have it in front of you and you can study it, you can take photographs, you can do sketches of it. It's just a more kind of personal, I suppose, connection with it as well, which I think is very, very important when it comes to handling sessions like that within museums as well. And Edith, I think I have a question for you that just came in as well. So what steps were taken to include sustainability in the exhibition and the creative processes?
From a curatorial perspective and design perspective, what we tried to do is use the cases that we had, display cases that were in place and that we had already, but also think forward and design the materials of the mounts cases on the plinth that you have seen, that dark fabric, to keep that color quite neutral, so we can reuse it for the next exhibition that's coming up in November about the Anglo-Irish Treaty. Vastly different, but there's still art to go with it. Lavery's paintings and the Anglo-Irish Treaty 1921. So for that exhibition, we have a lot of paper-based documents. So we try to think forward and see how can we combine it. Now for the jewelry and ceramics, very hard. We're discussing colors with the designer Ruja Liekor from Studio SAS, who did a great job at the overall design, graphic design of the exhibition as well. And Emma, you were saying it's so hard to mount jewelry and match the gold and silver to the very colorful, in some cases, museum objects. So we had a lot of different colors to keep in mind. So really we used materials that we can reuse, and we changed the mount maker, Denise and Joe Byrne. They designed the fit outs of the cases in a way that we can just take labels out and replace them really easily. We use cardboard for the panels instead of Foamex or plastic materials. So things like that are playing a much greater role now, and they have to in the museum. So that was one way. In terms of sustainability, I think what you mentioned, Gus, the relationships formed and the exchange that took place, I think will carry on as well for future projects, and even word of mouth carrying on, you know, what we have seen and learned from each other. You know, I think that makes museum work and curatorial work, as well as craft education and practicing crafts, much more connected and collaborative, I think. So that would be the first things that come to mind. I'm sure there's more to say. If you have some points there, Ima or Gus, or Lexi and Anne-Marie as well, in terms of the making process, what do you carry on?
I was thinking, you know, like our student, this project for our students was the final project of the course. So they'd already built up a huge, you know, vocabulary of skill, and had so much ability to work in their material that they could just fly with it. But it would be really interesting, I think, for the museum as well to collaborate with craftspeople, whether they're jewelers, ceramicists, goldsmiths, glass, whatever, with the conservation and restoration, or even just looking at some of the museum's objects to try and work out how were they made, because there are so many, you know, objects in the museum. I mean, when you just look at the, you know, the tower brooch or the Ardagh chalice or whatever, like they're not even sure how parts of those pieces are made. So I think there's definitely room to, you know, it could be really exciting to work with craftspeople that, you know, and young like craftspeople and students that, you know, are experimenting and playing around with material and coming up with, you know, ideas of possibly how some of these pieces may have been made. I think there's definitely could be a huge research. Maybe there's a PhD for somebody, but
if I can just come in, I mean, the original question about sustainability, I think all craftspeople are very aware of the sustainable aspect of making things now, not just in exhibiting and displaying them. It's a question that everybody's asking themselves. But I'd just like to point out that the catalogue was a superb, I think, recycled paper, but a beautifully produced catalogue, which is a record of the exhibition. And I think the museum ought to be congratulated on the quality and standard of that catalogue that goes with the InForm exhibition. It was a wonderful catalogue, yeah.
Mm.
We actually have another question that just came in as well. So first off, congratulations to the graduates, tutors, and all involved in the museum. Beautiful work and very informative to learn about the process. And the question is, will the newly acquired ceramic and jewellery pieces be displayed in the vicinity of the objects which inspired them? So I assume that's kind of after the exhibition comes down.
I think we're open. I think from our perspective, we would be very, very open to that, and the students would too. I think that's.
Well, the 4 pieces that the museum acquired will definitely remain on display, not in the same gallery. And I still have to figure out, we still have to make a decision where exactly we can place them next to the originals, because the original museum objects came from some permanent exhibition throughout the museum. So there's a little gap there now, so we can find a replacement and then pair the 4 acquired objects definitely with the museum objects, and have that, as I mentioned earlier, hopefully ongoing, that new work can, after a while, in 2 years or whenever the students have produced more or other contemporary makers, that it can be replaced then or moved along, you know, over the years. But at the moment we are we have to deinstall first and then put the Anglo-Irish Treaty exhibition up in collaboration with the ULane, and then we will display the acquired objects.
Edith, one of the things that I learned for sure was, you know, working with the museum and the museum's collection is a whole other ballgame from working with, you know, like we're used to in the National Design and Craft Gallery, craft people coming in with their work, you know, conservation, you know, lighting, temperature, all of these things have to be considered, and it's just it's a minefield in relation to displaying the work. And you know, so yeah, it's much more complicated than I ever imagined. And I think, how many people, Edith, did you say worked on the exhibition in total?
So around 50 people, including you, Anne-Marie and Lexi and all the other makers and the other tutors as well. Klaus Hartmann and Karen Morgan and Shay O'Donoghue from the jewellery course, and all the different tutors that took part. It was 50 people who had a core role in it, and around 100 people if you also include our front of house staff and DCCI staff as well that were involved. So it's a big project. And in terms of display, what you mentioned, Dima, I think the time element in a museum is definitely a different one when you display. And why? Because of course, if we include objects that are in the main museum collections, our aim is to have them there in 500 years. You know, it sounds exaggerated now, but this is what our role is, you know. So it's a constant mediating between making those pieces relevant, so we need to take them out and need to show them and have certain light levels, and at the same time protecting them so people after us can just as much as we do, hopefully, appreciate them and look at them. So it's a balancing act, but an exciting one. So.
And just as well, in terms of Lexi and Anne-Marie, for what kind of piece of advice would you give to future makers or anyone kind of coming in to kind of start out? Maybe they're a graduate course in ceramics or jewellery. What kind of advice would you give people who want to kind of pursue that type of practice?
For me, in pottery, the best advice you can give is be patient and don't give up. Ceramics is an amazing medium to work in, and there's a lot to learn, but it can be filled with frustration and disappointment, because things can go wrong and disasters will happen, but you also get such wonderful things out of it. So just keep learning, be patient, and if stuff goes wrong, take a deep breath, breathe out and go, okay, right, why did that go wrong? That's possibly why it went wrong, and keep trying again, because ceramics is wonderful, but it's a lifelong craft.
Yeah, I guess it's very similar with metal work or jewelry making or silversmithing. You kind of it's a lifelong learning experience, I guess, and every time something goes wrong, you learn something. So I think you have to be patient, and there's a lot of problem solving. And I think I think for people who are starting out, it's important to keep going and ask questions. And there's so many experienced craft people out there who have been doing it for ages. So it's really important to ask questions and inquire how things are made, and keep learning and keep continuing. But with what you love doing. So
I think that's excellent advice from both sides as well. I know Edith mentioned earlier that a couple of us from the museum, including myself, got to go down for a day to kind of work with both the ceramic students and the jewellery students, and there was a lot of trial and error from all the museum staff and learning from that entire day. So I can completely relate to that, and that was only one day. So definitely it's an excellent opportunity for people with both courses to kind of be involved in, and it's been amazing from us in the museum to be involved as well. It's been very, very interesting. I don't know whether anyone else from our participants has any other questions, or if any of our speakers would like to ask any questions themselves or kind of add in any points before we wrap up the session. Anything else you'd like to say?
I'd just like to say thank you so much to the museum, because said that earlier on, but it's been it's been a really I've felt really fortunate to have been involved in the project, and I know all of the students have too. Yeah, it's been really a fabulous experience all around, and just really great people to work with. I think we all work together really well, and the students absolutely, you know, came up to the plate. And I think, you know, anybody walking into that gallery is not thinking that that's student work. You could take that work and drop it into any, you know, professional practitioners exhibition. They've really done it. So round of applause to the students. They've really done an incredible job with the work they produced as well. So
yeah, and I'd just like to echo that you know, from the initial concept with Dr. Audrey Whitty, Emma and myself, you know, it just shows that when an idea gets momentum and you get people committed to seeing that idea come to fruition, what can be achieved, you know. And so starts off with conversation, people who have the vision and the energy to carry it through, because no end of ideas are just get lost, they just sort of evaporate and disappear. But this was one idea that was taken up, and I think Audrey Whitty needs great credit for that. And the end result is what you saw with InForm. And yeah, and it was a journey. I think the pandemic played its part in frustration, but I don't think I didn't come across anybody who lost their cool or patience. Everybody was just, we can do this, we'll put it off, it can be achieved. And it was just fantastic to walk into that room and see the exhibition. The day I went to Edith was doing videos. It was a great example of what can be achieved if you work together. Yeah.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to the museum, but also a huge thank you to those at the Design and Craft Council and in the jewellery course and in Thomastown. We couldn't have done it without you guys. So thank you to you as well. Because
I think what's going to be really interesting now is to see where the students go with these ideas and designs from the museum project. So I think it's kind of watch this space. And I know some of them I've seen with some of the jewellery students already. They're already starting to develop new work, and it's on the back of the museum project. So that's, you know, that's really exciting too.
On that note, can I thank and say hello to all the other makers that were involved as well, the 10 other jewellery and ceramic students, and also those 2 who were there with us in the beginning and had to drop out for various reasons, among them the pandemic as well. Thanks to all of you. So an absolute honor to be part of the project.
Thank you very much as well. It was a very, very good project, and I really enjoyed taking part of it. And yeah, I did learn a lot, and it's a very good experience. So thank you for everyone involved.
And everyone tuned in today. We hope, of course, that inspires you as well to start making or to be inspired creatively, wherever it may be in your work or in your creative practices. So do be inspired, hopefully, by the collections and by the wonderful contemporary pieces as well.
Okay, well, I think we will finish up the session here. I just want to thank everyone for a really, really inspiring talk that we had this evening for Culture Night. So thanks so much to Edith, to Emer, Lexi, Anne-Marie and Gus. Really, really appreciate it for joining us today. And thanks so much to our colleagues in Design and Crafts Council as well, Ash and Clancy in particular, for organising all of this with us as well. We're delighted to collaborate with you. And definitely, if you are up around Dublin in Collins Barracks, do drop in and see the exhibition before it closes in the next couple of days. If you do miss it though, we have a number of online video content up on our website and up on our YouTube channel as well. So if you just want to visit www.museum.ie, under Decorative Arts and History, you'll see all of our InForm content. We will be reposting this up online as well, and you can look back at 2 of our previous In Conversations event if you want to listen to a bit more. But thanks so much. We really appreciate it for joining us today, and I hope you have a lovely Friday evening. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.